We've covered some of the basics of planting and growing your own produce in small spaces, but we have so much more to learn because the important thing about growing these plants and vegetables is having good soil. Isn't that right, Amy?
Correct.
So where do folks want to start when they're thinking about getting certain types of soil?
Sure. When you do container planting, it is best to get a well-rounded potting mix. You don't want to take it just directly out of the ground, albeit cheaper. It probably will not have the right nutrients for your plant, and so you want to make sure that you have the right nutrients in your soil. So a nice potted mix from any local store would be fine.
And usually talking with your local, sales associate, they can kind of steer you in the right direction, depending on, what type of vegetable or plant that you're trying to grow.
Correct. Yes.
Is there any specific soil that works better with, let's say a basil plant versus a tomato plant, or is it all kind of generally you want to work with some of the similar soil?
Generally speaking, to keep it simple, you would just use a general potting mix. Now, if you were growing succulents, cactuses, they typically use a more drainable soil, and so that would be considered a different classification of soil. But typically speaking, as a beginner, you would just use a general potted soil.
And as a beginner, obviously you're going to want to invest in some tools. So what are some things that folks should consider purchasing, or maybe talking to a friend or family member to kind of gather up so they can get planting?
Sure. There's a lot of different containers you could use. You could even use 5-gallon buckets. That's how a lot of people get started, is just use a 5-gallon bucket that they have around their house, as long as it's cleaned out well. The other thing that works well is a spade or a trowel, and most people typically have 1 or 2 of these that garden, and they use them well for potted plants, and that's to dig out your potted soil, to dig out a hole to plant. It works well for transplanting. Even for those that garden in the actual ground, it's a very handy tool. And kids also absolutely love to get their fingers dirty, so we found that out with our garden education classes. And as a mom, the kids love it. So that is one way to get your kids involved, and has a great family project also.
Yeah, are there any sorts of tasks you can maybe put on a little checklist for kids that they could take care of? What are some of those tasks, and what might they look like?
Absolutely. Watering is a nice job for kids. They love to watch the plants grow. Yes, and that is a typical watering can that you'd have around your home for any potted plant. Watering is a good chore for the kids, as long as you teach them the proper watering techniques.
Mm-hmm. And what do those look like?
Well, watering is pretty simple, but one of the key things to avoid is to overwater. Those roots need oxygen to grow. They need to be able to breathe, and if you keep it in a bucket of water constantly, it will not get the necessary oxygen and not be able to expand. So basically, when you're outside, if you stick your finger in the ground and an inch down and it's dry, it's time to water.
Gotcha.
It's kind of typical to potted plants also. You just want to make sure once the roots are established that you let it dry a little and then re-water so it has time to expand.
Is that why they call it the best rule of thumb? Because you stick your thumb in there and then you figure out if it's ready to water or not?
Exactly.
Well, Amy, we appreciate your time again this morning, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.